My name is Darlene Lesh, 41 years old. The last time my parents spoke to me, they smiled at a stranger, then turned, saw my face, and used the word they had repeated for 13 years. Useless. Still useless. Still the daughter who had wasted her life. They said it in a crowded room, about me, and about the boy standing quietly at my side, the child they once called something I had dragged out of the gutter. They believed they were simply stating the truth, the way they always had. They did not know that, within minutes, someone else would read the truth aloud in front of everyone. But before that room, before that word, there were 13 years they never once asked about. Let me tell you how they began. I was an only child. In my parents' house, that did not make me the center of anything. It made me the only place where all their plans had to land. My mother, Maureen, carried a detailed picture of the life I was supposed to live, and my father, Gordon, controlled the money that could help build it. There was a school I would attend, a suitable man I would marry, a house in the right zip code, and grandchildren with the right last name. None of it looked cruel from the outside. It looked like a family that cared. But care in that house always came with a hand on your shoulder, quietly steering. I understood the rules early. A good daughter was an obedient daughter. Affection was something I earned by doing what I was told, and it could disappear the moment I resisted. My mother withdrew her warmth as cleanly as other people turn off a faucet, never raising her voice whenever I stepped an inch outside the life she had planned for me. I could give you 100 small examples, but one stands in for the rest. At 16, I wanted a summer position at a wildlife shelter an hour away. I had found it myself, arranged the rides myself, and was privately proud of it. My mother listened to the whole plan, then said it was unsuitable, and that I would spend the summer volunteering at my father's firm instead, filing papers where the right people could see me. When I objected, she did not argue. She stopped speaking to me. For 3 days, meals appeared without conversation until I called the shelter and withdrew. That was the lesson. My wanting was a problem to be managed, and silence would continue until I surrendered it. After that, I learned to want things quietly. I became very good at it. The trouble was that I never quite fit the shape. I did not marry the men they approved of, not because no one asked, but because I could not make myself want the life that came attached. I did not have children on the schedule they had set. I bought a small house at the edge of town with a yard sloping toward a fence line and filled it with what my parents called nonsense. A garden that took over more lawn each year, 2 unwanted dogs, a cat with 1 ear, and a rabbit left in a box outside the feed store. I worked at an animal rescue, cleaning cages and holding frightened animals, while the veterinarian worked, earning a little over $34,000 a year and coming home smelling like wet fur and antiseptic. To my mother, that was the whole tragedy of me. "You spend your life on things people throw away," she told me once, at a dinner where I'd said maybe 15 words all evening. She meant it as the worst thing she could say. She had no idea she was describing the best thing about me. I remember one dinner in particular, the fall I turned 27. My father cut his food into small squares the way he always did, precise, and said without looking up, "We didn't put all those years into you so you could shovel out kennels." My mother added softly, "It's not too late to be serious about your life, Darlene." I set my fork down, and I didn't argue. I had learned by then that arguing only gave them something to push against. I just let the silence sit there between us. On the table, next to the good china they only used to remind me what I was refusing. That was the pattern for years. Every independent choice widened the distance between us. In their eyes, the choices themselves were never really the crime. The real offense was that I had moved beyond their control, and I was not coming back. Then, the winter I was 28, I heard about a little boy. He was 5 years old and living in one of the poorest parts of the city, in circumstances the caseworker described with a flat, careful voice that told me more than the words did. He had no stable caregiver and had already learned things no 5-year-old should know. His age alone did not make placement impossible, but his history, fear responses, and need for long-term support made prospective families hesitate. The paperwork moved slowly, and he remained in temporary care. I met him on a gray Tuesday. He was small for his age and too quiet, and he sat in a plastic chair with his feet not reaching the floor, holding an empty tin can in both hands like it was the only thing that belonged to him. It was a can with the label soaked off, the kind you'd throw away without a thought. He wouldn't let go of it. I knelt down and I didn't reach for him. I just said, "That's a good can." And for the first time, he looked up at me. I knew, in the way some decisions begin before they are fully formed, that I wanted to become a safe person in his life. Bringing him home would still require assessments, visits, paperwork, and time. But by the end of that first meeting, I had decided to begin the process. I also knew what even trying would cost me, because I could already hear my mother's voice. I was right. I told my parents on a Sunday, in their living room, with the good lamp on and the clock ticking. I said I had been approved to adopt a 5-year-old boy named Owen, and that the placement would soon become permanent. My mother's face did what I had watched it do my whole life, the warmth shut off, clean and silent. This time, however, contempt rose close enough to the surface for her to name it. "A useless spinster," she said quietly, as though delivering a diagnosis. "That's what you've decided to become. We did not raise you to throw your life away on somebody else's child." My father stood without raising his voice. In the hall closet was a small suitcase I still kept there for holiday visits, containing a few clothes and toiletries. He took it out, carried it to the front door, and set it on the porch. Beyond it, the lawn was still wet from the sprinklers. "If you're determined to build your life around people and things nobody else wants," he said, "then don't expect to keep coming back here for support." I remember standing there with my coat half on. I remember that I didn't cry and I didn't beg and I didn't explain. There was nothing to explain to people who had already decided. I picked up the suitcase. I said, "Okay," and I left. The adoption expenses and the loss of any family safety net changed what I could afford. Within months, I sold the small house, used what little equity remained to cover fees and debts, and moved Owen and me into a cheaper 2-bedroom rental. It was not the life my parents had planned for me, but it was a home I could keep without asking their permission. Here is the part I could only laugh at later, the bitter kind of laugh. By the middle of 2014, roughly a year and a half after they set my suitcase outside for adopting Owen, my parents had completed an adoption of their own. They were in their late 50s and had never had another biological child. I could not know every reason they chose adoption, only that they brought home a 7-year-old boy named Caleb. The relatives described him as polite, quiet, and eager to please. I heard the news through a cousin, because my parents had not spoken to me since the night they put my suitcase outside. That was when I understood something I had not allowed myself to see. Adoption itself had never been their objection. If it had been, they could not have embraced it 2 years later. What they had rejected was my decision to build a family without their approval and with a child whose history did not fit the image they valued. Caleb was not responsible for that hypocrisy. The conflict belonged entirely to the adults who applied one standard to themselves and another to me. From the reports that reached me, Caleb learned quickly how much my parents valued politeness, order, and compliance. Their household looked calm from the outside, though I had learned long ago that quiet was not the same as closeness. What they did not understand was that the daughter they had pushed away was building a family whose worth had nothing to do with obedience. The first months with Owen taught me what I'd actually signed up for. The place I could afford after selling the house was a 2-bedroom rental for $900 a month, with thin walls and a radiator that knocked all night. I picked up extra shifts at the rescue and cleaned offices 2 evenings a week after Owen fell asleep, which meant asking a trusted neighbor to sit in my living room with a book while he slept 20 feet away. The math never quite worked. I learned the particular arithmetic of being poor, which bill could wait, which could not, and how many days one package of chicken could stretch. The first night in the new place, Owen wouldn't get into the bed I'd made up for him. He stood in the doorway of his room holding the tin can, watching the mattress like it might be a trap. I didn't push. I sat down on the floor in the hallway where he could see me, and I told him I'd be right there, and I stayed until the sky went gray. Sometime around 4, he crept out and lay down on the floor beside me, not touching, just close enough to be sure I was still real, and that was where we both woke up, stiff and cold, when the radiator finally kicked on. I made pancakes. He ate 4 and slid the 5th into his sleeve, and I pretended not to see, and I made a 6th. Owen did not arrive without difficult needs, and I never expected him to. He hid food. I found crackers under his pillow, and a heel of bread zipped into his backpack, going stale. He was not stealing. He was making sure. Somewhere in his first 5 years, he had learned that food disappears, adults disappear, and a full stomach today says nothing about tomorrow. I did not punish the hiding. I made sure there was always more, until one day, months later, I found the hidden crackers gone soft and untouched, and understood that he no longer needed them in quite the same way. He flinched at loud sounds, a dropped pan, a slammed car door, and he'd go still all over, the way a small animal goes still. I learned to move slowly in my own house. I learned to say what I was about to do before I did it. I'm going to open this drawer now. I'm going to turn on the water. He watched my hands constantly, tracking them, and it took me a while to realize he was checking to see if they'd ever be raised at him. When he finally understood they wouldn't, something in his shoulders came down about 1/2 inch and stayed there. I had almost no one. My parents were gone. Most of my old friends had drifted off during the years I'd spent slowly becoming the family disappointment. But I had Nora. Nora worked the front desk at the rescue, a loud, warm woman who had raised 3 children on almost nothing and had no patience for self-pity, including mine. She sat with Owen while I cleaned offices and helped without making that help feel like a debt. She never told me I was doing something noble. She simply did useful, quiet things in our direction, which I came to think was the only kind of belief that truly counted. There was a week that February when the radiator died for good, and the landlord took 9 days to send anyone. Owen and I slept in coats, and I lay awake, listening to him breathe and doing the math on a space heater I couldn't afford to run. On the 3rd night, there was a knock. It was Nora, with a slow cooker in her arms and an extension cord over her shoulder, not asking whether we needed help, just walking past me into the kitchen and plugging it in. "It's stew," she said. "Don't make it weird." She left the slow cooker. She left the space heater from her own bedroom. When I tried to thank her, she waved me off like I'd insulted her. I learned more about love from that woman in 9 days than I'd learned from my parents in 30 years. The tin can came home with Owen. Of course it did. It was the only thing he owned. I could have thrown it out. It was, by any measure, garbage. Instead, one afternoon that first spring, I set it on the kitchen windowsill, filled it with dirt, and pressed a single acorn into it. Owen watched me like I'd done something strange. "Things grow," I told him, "if somebody bothers to take care of them. Even in a can nobody wanted." He didn't say anything, but the next morning I found him standing on a chair at the sill, checking it, the way he checked everything, to see if it was still there. I want to be clear about something. I didn't take Owen to prove anything to my parents. I wasn't running an experiment in redemption. I took him because a child needed a home, and I happened to have one, full of animals nobody wanted and a garden nobody thought was worth the water. But I'd be lying if I said the loneliness didn't cut, especially in the early years, when the work was hardest and there was no one on the other end of a phone to tell me I wasn't crazy. One night I lay awake doing the arithmetic again, and I made myself a promise, out loud, in a whisper, so it would count. I promised that whatever this boy became, it would be because someone had chosen him and stayed. Not because of where he came from, in spite of it. Then, in the middle of 2014, a cousin's text arrived telling me that my parents had adopted a 7-year-old boy named Caleb. The promise I had whispered to Owen became heavier and sharper all at once. The years after that don't sort themselves into neat chapters. They sort into moments, some of them small enough that anyone watching would have missed them, all of them load-bearing. When Caleb came into my parents' lives, I braced for grief and got something more complicated instead. I wasn't jealous of a 7-year-old. He hadn't done anything. What I felt was the particular vertigo of watching two people do gently, for a stranger, the thing they'd cast me out for doing. They took Caleb to church picnics and grandparent days. They put his school photos on the mantle where mine used to be, and they told the whole extended family a story in which they were generous, open-hearted people who'd welcomed a child in need, the exact thing they'd called me useless for. Nobody corrected the story. That is how those stories survive. If someone has ever condemned you for a choice they later praised themselves for making, when did you realize the issue was never the choice? It was that they could not control yours? Tell me what finally made the double standard clear. I saw the photographs once. The cousin who had texted me showed them on her phone at a mutual friend's funeral without quite thinking. My parents sat at Thanksgiving, behind the long table and the good china I remembered, with Caleb in a sweater vest between them. My mother's hand rested on his shoulder, steering, even in a photograph. I looked longer than I intended, not because I wanted my old place back, but because I was seeing warmth I had been denied offered inside a household that still looked carefully controlled. I handed the phone back and said Caleb looked like a nice boy. I meant it. None of this was his fault. I could not know what he felt in that house. I only knew he seemed to have learned how much my parents valued quietness, politeness, and staying inside the lines. Meanwhile, Owen was becoming himself. He was smart in a way that surprised his teachers before it surprised me. He read early and then read constantly, the way some kids ran or drew, like it was where he went to feel safe. By 2nd grade, he was bringing home books above his level, and by 3rd grade, a teacher pulled me aside at pickup to say, carefully, that Owen wasn't just doing well, he was doing something unusual. That spring, there was a 4th grade assembly where they handed out awards, and Owen won one for reading, the most books in the school, or close to it. I took the afternoon off, which cost me a shift I couldn't really spare, and I sat in a folding chair in a gym that smelled like rubber and floor wax. And when they called his name, he walked up in the button shirt I'd ironed that morning and shook the principal's hand. He looked for me in the crowd before he sat down. I was the only one there for him. No grandparents, no aunts, just me, waving like a fool. And I thought, they should see this. And then I thought, no, they gave up the right to see this. This is mine. Nora came to the 5th grade assembly the next year and clapped so loud she embarrassed him. And I decided that was the family we had, and that it was enough. I wish I could tell you those years were a steady climb. They were not. Every step forward stood beside a bill I could not pay. When the rescue cut hours one winter, I took a weekend job bagging groceries and came home with my feet aching after Owen was asleep, his light left on for me. In 2016, when Owen was 9, I fell 2 months behind on rent. After a double shift, I found a formal notice taped to the front door of our rental. Owen had already read it and gone quiet in the old way. He asked if we were going to lose our home. I told him no, then made it true by borrowing from Nora and selling my grandmother's ring, the only valuable thing I owned and the last gift connecting me to my parents. I do not regret it. A ring is an object. A frightened boy watching me make sure he remained safely housed was the whole point. Nora accepted my small repayments for a year because she understood that allowing me to pay her back was its own kind of kindness. For the next year, every payment I made to Nora reminded me that dignity could survive receiving help. The hardest blow did not come from money. It came in the spring of 2018, when Owen was 11 and a boy at school learned enough about his early history to turn it into a game. Gutter kid, trash boy. Owen came home and did not hide food this time. He hid himself in his bedroom closet, the smallest space he could find. Through the door, he asked a question I have never forgotten. Is it true I came from the garbage? I sat down on the floor outside that door and told him the truth, which was better than any comfort I could invent. I told him that where a person starts has nothing to do with what that person is worth. I reminded him of the animals in our house, each abandoned after someone decided it had no value, and how each had simply needed someone to look again. Then I reminded him of the acorn we had first planted in his dented can. We had moved the sprout into a larger pot years earlier, and by then, it was a young sapling growing steadily near the kitchen window. People saw a useless can, I said. We used it to begin something that kept growing. He opened the door. He didn't say anything. He just came out and put his head against my shoulder, and we sat there on the hallway floor until the light changed. Later that year, one of Owen's middle school teachers entered his name for a district academic program, and something shifted. Not luck, attention. This teacher was not Miss Farrow, who would enter his life in high school, but the first educator to connect his ability with a formal opportunity. Owen tested into an advanced track. He began coming home lit up about subjects I could not always follow, and I nodded, asked questions, and loved every second of not understanding because it meant he was reaching places I had never been able to reach. Through all of it, my parents stayed exactly where they were. A birthday would pass with no card. I'd run into a relative at the pharmacy who'd mention, brightly, that Mom and Dad had taken Caleb to the lake and watch my face to see if it landed. It landed. But it landed on a woman who was busy and tired and quietly, ferociously proud of a boy who had just brought home a certificate with his name on it. Their silence used to feel like a verdict. Somewhere in those years, it started to feel like weather. Cold, but not personal. Just the climate I'd learned to dress for. The oak grew with him. I had moved the first sprout from the tin can into a proper pot during Owen's first year with me. In 2020, when he turned 13, we planted the knee-high sapling in the corner of the yard where the light was best. My mother's contempt still lived in my head while I dug, though she had never seen this particular tree. It was the voice she had used for everything I chose to nurture without her approval. We planted it anyway, and it kept reaching. By the time Owen started high school, I stopped bracing for him to fall behind. He was ahead, steadily, undeniably ahead, and I let myself begin, very carefully, to hope out loud. High school is where the boy I'd raised became a young man other people started to notice, and where the shape of what might be possible finally came into view. Owen entered high school in the advanced track and remained near the top of his class. By the end of junior year, his counselor told us he was one of several students still in contention for valedictorian. He was never showy about it. He simply worked steadily, without needing an audience, much the way Nora had helped us and I had done the daily work at the rescue. On Saturdays, he began tutoring younger neighborhood students for free because someone had once noticed his ability and he wanted to offer that same attention to somebody else. The money question was real, and there was no magic answer. Owen qualified to compete for a small group of scholarships combining exceptional academic performance with documented financial need. His transcript, recommendations, essays, and our household income made him a credible applicant, not a guaranteed winner. A full scholarship was possible, but only if he completed the work and one of those programs chose him. The middle school teacher had opened Owen's first academic door. Miss Farrow, his English teacher during junior and senior year, helped him understand the next one. She explained which scholarships matched his record, read early essay drafts, and told him when the writing was honest and when it was merely careful. She did not do the work for him. She helped him see that the history he had spent years trying not to be ashamed of could become part of a truthful application. I met Ms. Farrow properly at a conference that fall, in an after-hours classroom with desks too small for adults. She said Owen was one of the strongest writers she had taught in years. Then she added, "He does not write to impress people. He pays attention to what other people carry. That usually begins somewhere outside a classroom." Nobody had ever described the home I built as the source of something good. I sat in the driveway for several minutes before going inside. Through the window, I could see Owen at his desk, typing, stopping, and beginning again on the piece he was not ready to show me. During the fall of senior year, Owen began writing an essay he would not show me. I knew it was part of his scholarship applications. I saw the light under his door late and heard him type, stop, and begin again. Once I asked whether he wanted another reader. He said, "Not yet," in a voice that told me not to push, so I did not. I had spent 13 years learning that care was not the same as control. Ms. Farrow later encouraged him to submit a revised version for the school's senior writing distinction, whose winning piece could be excerpted during graduation with the student's permission. At a spring conference, she told me only, "He wrote about the thing that matters most to him." Her expression made me curious, but I understood that the decision to share it belonged to Owen. In early 2025, the news arrived in stages. First came a full scholarship offer from a highly regarded university, covering tuition and housing. Later, after final grades were reviewed, the school confirmed Owen as valedictorian. He read each letter twice at the kitchen counter and set it down carefully, as though the words might change if handled too quickly. Outside the window, the oak was taller than both of us, its new spring leaves opening at the tips. I thought that was the summit. I thought nothing left could surprise me. I hadn't yet learned that Owen wasn't the only one from my old life graduating that June. Nora noticed the connection when she saw a preliminary graduation roster posted by the school. One name appeared near Owen's alphabetically, Caleb Lesh. I had known Caleb's first name and approximate age through relatives, but I had never seen his full school record or photograph clearly enough to connect him with a classmate Owen mentioned only occasionally. I went very still. Caleb had been 7 when my parents adopted him in 2014, making him almost exactly Owen's age. The two families lived within the same large school district, but different addresses and routines had kept us apart. Owen and Caleb had crossed paths in a large elective and knew each other by first name. not as friends close enough to discuss families. Seeing both full names on the same graduating class roster was the first time I understood that they would finish school in the same room. And it meant that in June, at that graduation, my parents would be there. Not for Owen. They didn't know Owen from any other boy in a gown. They would be there for Caleb, proud in their contained way, though I knew too little about his life with them to decide what that pride had cost him. And somewhere in that same auditorium, for the first time since my father set my suitcase on the grass, I would be in a room with them. Owen told me that he and Caleb had shared one large elective and exchanged ordinary conversation. Caleb seemed polite, quiet, and careful, but Owen did not know him well enough to explain why. Neither boy knew there was a family history connecting them, and neither carried responsibility for it. I refused to turn Caleb into evidence for a theory about my parents. He was another adopted child entitled to his own private story, not the obedient replacement I had sometimes imagined from a distance. The question that kept me up wasn't whether to go. The school assigned family seating by graduate sections rather than by individual households. Because Owen and Caleb appeared near each other on the roster, our tickets placed us in the same general block of seats. I knew before graduation morning that seeing my parents was possible, though I did not know exactly how close they would be. Owen was graduating first in his class. Nothing on earth was keeping me out of that room. The question was how to walk in. Whether to shrink, to sit in the back, to slip out before the crowd. Whether to spend the proudest day of my life braced against two people who'd decided who I was before I'd even had the chance to become it. I decided I wasn't going to shrink. Not out of some plan to confront them. I didn't have a plan. I had no speech prepared, no scheme, no card up my sleeve except the one that had been growing quietly for 13 years without either of us calling it that. My only strategy was to walk into my son's graduation with my head level and let the day be whatever it was going to be. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is simply refuse to disappear. Have you ever walked into an important day knowing someone from your past might try to make you small again? What helped you enter the room without handing them control of the moment? The night before, I couldn't sleep. I went out to the yard around midnight and stood under the oak with a mug going cold in my hands. 13 years. I thought about all the versions of this I'd rehearsed over the years without meaning to. The speeches I'd give my parents if I ever saw them again. The way I'd finally make them understand. Standing under that tree, I let all of them go. I didn't want to give a speech. I didn't want to win an argument. I just wanted to watch my son walk across a stage, and I wanted to be a person who could do that with her head up, no matter who was sitting 2 rows back. The kitchen light came on behind me. Owen couldn't sleep either. Through the window, I watched him get a glass of water and stand there a second, looking out at me under the tree, and he lifted his hand, and I lifted mine, and neither of us said anything because we didn't have to. The morning of, I ironed Owen's shirt while he stood in the kitchen too nervous to eat. I fixed his collar. He was taller than me now, and I had to reach up to do it, and for a second, neither of us moved. Then I looked past him, out the window at the oak in the corner of the yard. A young tree now, taller than both of us, and beginning to cast shade across the fence line. 13 years up from an acorn in a can somebody had thrown away. "You ready?" I asked. "Are you?" he said, and I understood what he meant. "I am ready to watch you graduate," I told him. "The rest can be whatever it is." And we went. The auditorium was the kind of place that swallows sound and gives it back too loud. Folding chairs on a basketball court, a stage with a podium and a banner, families packed shoulder to shoulder in their good clothes, holding programs and flowers and phones. Owen walked me toward our assigned section before joining the other graduates. An usher temporarily held the students at the aisle, so he remained beside me while I found my seat and opened the program. His name was there, near the top, next to the word I still could not quite believe when I heard it. My mother's laugh, 2 rows back and to the left, 13 years, and I knew it instantly. I did not turn around immediately. I sat with the program in my hands and let the fact settle. Then I looked, because refusing to look would have been another kind of flinching. My parents were 2 rows back, older and smaller than the giants in my memory. Gordon's hair had gone white, and Maureen's hands were folded in her lap exactly as I remembered. Caleb stood at the end of their row for a moment before returning to the graduate assembly area, dressed in his gown and looking mildly anxious in the ordinary way of a student trying not to miss instructions. My parents smiled at him with a warmth I had once worked hard to earn. Maureen's eyes moved idly along the rows and found me. Recognition arrived first, followed almost immediately by the old contempt. She murmured something to Gordon. He turned and found me too. Owen was still beside me. He had walked me to the assigned section before returning to the graduate line, and we had paused because an usher was temporarily holding students at the aisle. Maureen leaned forward just enough to be heard by us and several people nearby. "Well, look who came after all. Still wasting your life, I see." Her gaze moved to Owen. "And you still expect everyone to pretend a boy you pulled out of the slums proves you made something of yourself." The nearby conversation stopped. Owen went rigid beside me, and I felt him draw the breath he was about to use to defend us. I put my hand over Owen's. I did not turn toward my parents or raise my voice. I had learned long ago that arguing with people who had already decided who you were only gave them another surface to push against. "Not today," I told him quietly. "Go back to your line. Today, you get to be exactly who you are." He looked at me for a long moment, squeezed my hand, and followed the usher toward the graduate assembly area. My mother made a small sound that I recognized from childhood, the sound she made when silence followed one of her judgments. She appeared to take my refusal to answer as surrender. She did not know that Owen had written something months earlier under the light in his bedroom, or that part of it was about to be read aloud to the room. The ceremony began. Speeches I barely heard, blood in my ears. And then Dr. Alden Whitfield, the head of the school, stepped to the podium and said it was his honor to introduce the valedictorian of the graduating class. He read Owen's name. I watched my son cross the stage. I watched him shake the hand and turn to face the crowded auditorium, and I saw him find me in the crowd, one beat before he looked back at Dr. Whitfield, who had a single sheet of paper in his hand and a look on his face I recognized because I'd seen it on Ms. Farrow at that conference. The look of a person about to give away something they've been holding for you. "Before Owen speaks," Dr. Whitfield said, "I want to recognize this year's senior writing distinction." The faculty selected a revised essay Owen first submitted with his scholarship applications. With his permission, I would like to read a brief excerpt before he gives the valedictory address. The room settled. "When I was 5 years old," Dr. Whitfield read, "the only thing I owned was an empty tin can. I held onto it because it was mine, and nothing else was. Everyone who looked at me saw where I came from. One person looked at the can, the piece of garbage in my hands, and instead of throwing it away, she filled it with dirt and planted something in it and told me things grow if somebody bothers to take care of them, even in a container nobody wanted." I heard somewhere behind me a small sound. I didn't turn. "That woman did the same thing to me that she did to that can," Dr. Whitfield went on, and his voice was not quite steady now. "The world had thrown me out. She didn't see garbage. She saw something that would grow. She gave me her name, her home, and 13 years of safety without asking me to become anyone but myself. The work on this transcript is mine, but I was able to do it because someone chose me before there was any achievement to reward. Her name is Darlene, and the acorn we planted in that can is an oak tree now, taller than both of us, in the corner of the yard." Dr. Whitfield set the paper down. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, your valedictorian." Owen stepped to the microphone, and in the most important minute of his life so far, he didn't talk about himself. He looked out until he found me again, and he said, "I want to thank my mom." His voice cracked on the word, and he let it. "She's the woman in that essay. She took me home when I was 5 and taught me that a person's worth has nothing to do with where they begin. She did not turn me into somebody else. She gave me the safety and time to become myself." He paused. "The acorn we planted in an empty can became a tree because someone kept tending it. Someday I want to give another person the same chance she gave me." He said, "Thank you, Mom." The room began to rise. It happened in waves. A few people first, then one section, then chairs scraping across the floor as much of the audience stood for Owen and for the mother he had just honored. Not every person rose, and not every person understood the full history, but the applause grew beyond the polite response given to an ordinary speech. It carried recognition, admiration, and more than a few tears. I stayed in my seat a moment longer than everyone else because my legs weren't working, and because I finally let myself cry. Not the ugly kind, just water running down while I looked at my son, who was looking at me, both of us wrecked and grinning across the whole length of a room. And then, because I couldn't help it, I looked back and to the left. My parents remained seated while many people around them stood. Less than 2 minutes earlier, they had dismissed Owen as evidence of my failure. Now they were watching the room honor his achievement and the life we had built together. Maureen's hand was pressed against her chest. Gordon stared toward the stage with an expression I had never seen on him before, not necessarily understanding everything, but realizing that the version of us he had carried for 13 years could no longer remain unchanged. I expected triumph, but what I felt was closer to grief. For one clear second, I could see another life that might have existed if they had chosen differently 13 years earlier. A life in which Maureen's hand on a shoulder meant warmth instead of control, and in which they had known Owen as he grew rather than meeting his accomplishments from a distance. That possibility had once been available to them. They had refused it the night Gordon placed my suitcase outside, and no applause could recover the years they had chosen not to share. Caleb stood near them, applauding warmly for a classmate he knew only casually. He glanced once at my parents' faces, clearly aware that something had shifted, but without enough information to understand why. In that moment, he was not their obedient son or my comparison point. He was simply another graduating student responding generously to Owen's achievement. I had not said anything to humiliate them, and Owen had not spoken to punish anyone. He did not even know they were in the room. He had simply told the truth about the person who raised him, and that truth exposed the distance between what my parents had assumed and what our life had actually become. After the ceremony, my parents approached me outside the auditorium as families spilled into the June light. Owen stood several feet away, speaking with Miss Farrow. Gordon and Maureen stopped in front of me, and for a moment, none of us spoke. 13 years of silence had narrowed into a few feet of hot pavement. My mother spoke first. Of course she did. "Darlene." The edge had left her voice, replaced by something more urgent. "We didn't know. How could we have known what his life had become? You never told us about school, the scholarship, any of it." "You never asked," I said. Not sharp, just true. My father cleared his throat. He was looking somewhere over my shoulder. "The boy has done very well," Gordon said. "Whatever happened between us, you are still our daughter. That makes him part of this family, too. His achievement reflects on all of us." "He carries my name," I said. "Not yours. He was never yours to reflect on." I said it quietly, and I watched it land, and I did not enjoy it as much as I'd once imagined I would. There's no pleasure in watching your parents realize what they threw away. There's just a kind of tired weight where the old wanting used to be. My mother's eyes filled. "We made a mistake," she said. "One mistake, a long time ago, and we've had to live with—" "No." I stopped her, gently, and this is the thing I'd waited 13 years to be able to say cleanly, without shaking. A mistake is one moment followed by responsibility. What you did became 13 years of choices. You let birthdays and holidays pass without contacting me. You allowed relatives to believe I had abandoned the family. Then you built another family while continuing to reject mine. Do not call that one mistake now, simply because you have finally seen what those choices cost. My mother was crying openly now. My father had gone very still. Several feet behind them, Caleb lifted a hand toward Owen in a casual goodbye, and Owen returned it. Neither boy knew the full history between the adults, and neither needed to carry it on graduation day. "I am not going to scream or turn this into another public scene," I said. "But you do not receive a place in Owen's life, or mine, because you finally saw something you admire. You cannot skip 13 years. I looked at Maureen and felt a trace of pity beneath the anger. If you ever want contact, begin with an honest apology and no demands. Any relationship after that will depend on what you do consistently, and Owen will decide for himself whether he wants one." Owen had come to stand beside me by then. My mother turned to him, and I watched her try to rearrange her face into something grandmotherly. 13 years too late. "Owen," she started, we're so proud." Owen did not answer cruelly. He said only, "I don't know you, and today isn't the day to change that." Then he looked at me. It was a boundary without an insult, spoken by a young man who understood that firmness did not require a raised voice. I turned before they could answer. I put my hand on Owen's back. "Come on," I said. "Let's go home." We went home. Gordon and Maureen remained in the parking lot, while Owen and I walked away together. For the first time, they had to face a relationship they could neither claim nor direct. Owen would decide for himself whom he called family. It is late August 2025 as I tell you this, a little over 2 months after graduation. Evening light enters the kitchen at a long gold angle, and the house is full in the particular way I like. Owen left for college 3 weeks ago. Most of his belongings went into boxes and borrowed luggage, but I packed a few sweaters into the small suitcase Gordon had once placed outside. I had kept it all those years, and using it for one part of Owen's departure felt like changing what it meant. He calls every Sunday, and often once during the week. He tells me about people whose names I am learning, and I tell him which animal at the rescue has done something ridiculous. We do not need to keep saying that we made it. The life itself says it for us. The rescue promoted me to shift supervisor in spring 2025. The raise was modest, and the work remained mostly cages, frightened animals, paperwork, and people unsure whether they were capable of helping. I now spend part of each week guiding prospective adopters through the difficult cases instead of letting fear make the decision for them. That is still the work, looking carefully at what somebody else has already dismissed. The week before Owen left, he asked whether I would ever forgive them. We were washing dishes on his last ordinary night at home. I told him I did not know, and that uncertainty was not a moral failure. Forgiveness was not a debt created by blood. It would depend on whether Gordon and Maureen accepted responsibility and changed over time. Owen dried a plate, considered that, and said, "That's a very you answer, Mom." We laughed in the small kitchen, with the window open to the summer air. A few weeks after graduation, a 3-page letter arrived in Maureen's careful handwriting and signed by both of them. It contained the beginning of an apology, specific admissions, fewer excuses than I expected, and no demand for immediate access to Owen. I read it twice and placed it in a drawer. I did not destroy it, and I did not answer. One letter cannot prove that 13 years of behavior have changed. For now, I am allowing their future actions, not their preferred timetable, to determine what happens next. The oak is tall enough now to cast real shade across the corner of the yard. I sat under it last night while the dogs ran themselves stupid in the yard, and I looked up through all those leaves at the last of the light, and I thought about the empty can on a windowsill and a little boy standing on a chair to check if it was still there. The can is still here too, rinsed, dented, and kept on the kitchen windowsill where Owen once checked it each morning. It no longer holds the tree, but it still marks where everything began. I am 41 years old. Part of me still remembers what it was like to want my parents' approval, but that wanting no longer decides how I live. I have a son who calls me Mom because he means it, and a home shared with creatures other people once dismissed. Owen and I were never worthless. We were people whose value my parents chose not to see. I survived their rejection, built a family of my own, and no longer need their agreement to know what that family is worth. If someone once treated you as though you were disposable, or if you were the person who recognized value where others refused to look, then you understand this story. Who saw you clearly when you most needed it? Or whom did you choose to stand beside when others walked away? Tell me in the comments if you feel comfortable sharing. I will be reading.